I'm Hazel Bennett, 29 years old, and on what should have been the happiest day of my life, I found myself scanning the crowd during our vows, desperately searching for my parents' faces. The historic Harrison Estate Gardens were exactly as I'd always dreamed, roses in full bloom, string lights twinkling overhead, and 150 guests witnessing our love story culminate. But the two empty seats in the front row told their own story. My parents didn't miss my wedding because they couldn't afford to attend. They deliberately chose to skip it because, in their words, I refused to make it less flashy than my perfect sisters. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever dealt with family drama or felt like the less favored child, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real stories like mine. Sometimes, the people who should support us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. Stick around to hear how I handled one of the most painful family betrayals imaginable. To understand why my parents' absence cuts so deep, you need to know about my family dynamics. We were an upper-middle-class family from suburban Boston. My father, Robert, a successful financial advisor, my mother, Diana, a well-respected high school principal. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family, living in a colonial-style home with a carefully manicured lawn and hosting neighborhood barbecues every summer. But inside those walls, a different story unfolded. My sister, Stephanie, 3 years older at 32, was always the golden child. Growing up, she did everything right according to my parents' standards. She was valedictorian of her high school class, graduated summa cum laude from Harvard with a biology degree, and went on to become a pediatric surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital. Stephanie volunteers at a free clinic twice a month, sits on the board of 2 charities, and runs marathons for cancer research. Her life has followed an impeccable trajectory that my parents never fail to mention at family gatherings or to their friends. I, on the other hand, took a different path. I was a good student but not exceptional like Stephanie. Where she was methodical and analytical, I was creative and spontaneous. After graduating with a business degree from Boston University, I worked for a prestigious event planning company before eventually launching my own business at 25. Within 4 years, Bennett Events became one of Boston's most sought-after event planning services, specializing in luxury weddings and corporate galas. I've been featured in Boston Magazine and have a growing social media following showcasing my work. But no matter what I achieved, it was never quite enough in comparison to Stephanie's accomplishments. When I made honor roll, my parents would nod and say, "That's nice, honey." But when Stephanie made honor roll, there were celebratory dinners. When I won a regional award for a business plan competition in college, my father's response was, "That's interesting. Did you know Stephanie just got accepted to 3 medical schools?" When my business turned its first profit, my mother wondered aloud why I hadn't used my potential to pursue something truly meaningful like Stephanie had. These moments accumulated over years, subtle put-downs, comparisons, and a palpable sense that I was somehow the family disappointment despite my successes. I tried everything to win their approval, taking extra classes, participating in the community service projects they valued, even briefly considering medical school to follow in Stephanie's footsteps before realizing it'd be miserable. I met Jason Miller at a charity gala I was organizing 4 years ago. He was the architect who had designed the venue's recent renovation, and we connected instantly over our shared creative vision and love of historical buildings. Jason is everything I could want in a partner: supportive, kind, ambitious in his own right, and most importantly, he sees me for who I truly am. When he proposed after 3 years together, during a private tour of an 18th-century lighthouse we both adored, I didn't hesitate to say yes. 2 years before our engagement, Stephanie had married Richard Thompson, a cardiothoracic surgeon she met during her residency. Richard matched Stephanie: perfectly serious, career-focused, and conservative in his tastes and values. Their wedding was held at the small church our family had attended since childhood, with a reception for 75 guests at a local country club. The entire affair was modest by most standards: simple floral arrangements, a traditional sit-down dinner, and a string quartet for music. My parents praised Stephanie's wedding endlessly, calling it a model of elegant restraint and tasteful tradition. They contributed $40,000 toward it and handled much of the planning alongside Stephanie. What I didn't know then, but would discover later, was that this wedding would become the measuring stick against which my own would be judged and found wanting. After the initial excitement of our engagement settled, Jason and I began planning our wedding. As an event planner myself, I couldn't help but feel professionally and personally invested in creating something spectacular. This wasn't just any client's wedding, this was my own chance to express our love story through an event that reflected who we are as a couple. When I called my parents to share the news of our engagement, they seemed genuinely happy for us. Mom cried and said Shed always liked Jason, while Dad gave his gruff approval, saying Jason seemed like a steady young man with good prospects. I felt a surge of hope that perhaps this milestone would help bridge the distance it always felt between us. That hope started to crumble 3 weeks later, when I visited my parents' home to show my mother my wedding Pinterest board. As a visual person, I'd compiled images of venues, color palettes, floral arrangements, and decor that inspired me. I was particularly excited about a historic mansion with extensive gardens that had recently opened for events, the Harrison Estate, where we eventually held our wedding. "Isn't it gorgeous, Mom?" I asked, showing her photos of the estate's grand staircase and rose gardens. "It has this amazing history too. It was built in 1887 and has these incredible architectural details Jason loves." My mother studied the images with a tightening around her mouth. "It's certainly..." "Elaborate," she said finally. "You know, Stephanie's venue was so charming in its simplicity. Everyone commented on how tasteful it was. This would be different." I acknowledged, "But I think it really fits our personalities. Plus, we want to have about 150 guests, since Jason has a large extended family." "Stephanie kept her guest list to 75, Mom reminded me. She said she only wanted truly meaningful relationships represented on her special day, not just a crowd for show." Each idea I shared was met with similar comparisons to Stephanie's choices. My vision for abundant garden roses and ranunculus was countered with praise for Stephanie's modest but elegant baby's breath and carnation arrangements. My excitement about a live band was dampened by reminders of how personal and intimate Stephanie's string quartet had been. The tension escalated significantly when we officially booked the Harrison Estate. I called my parents to share the news, genuinely excited that we had secured our dream venue for a date only 10 months away, a minor miracle in Boston's competitive wedding market. "We put down the deposit today," I told them enthusiastically. The coordinator said we were incredibly lucky they had a cancellation for next June. A weighted silence filled the line before my father spoke. "Hazel, don't you think this is all a bit excessive? This mansion business seems like showing off. What's wrong with the church where you were raised and Stephanie was married?" "Dad, I'm not religious anymore, you know that. And this venue means something to Jason and me. We want our wedding to reflect who we are." "And who are you exactly?" he asked, his voice taking on the edge I'd heard countless times growing up. "Someone who needs to flaunt her success? Someone who has to outdo her sister?" "This isn't about Stephanie," I protested, feeling my chest tighten with familiar hurt. "This is about creating a day that feels authentic to us." "There's authentic, and then there's wasteful extravagance," my father replied. "You've always had this need to be the center of attention, Hazel. We raised you better than this." The conversation devolved from there, ending with my mother getting on the line to keep the peace, while actually reinforcing everything my father had said, just with a gentler tone. By the time we hung up, I was fighting back tears. Jason found me on our apartment balcony an hour later, still upset. When I explained what had happened, his confusion was evident. "But your parents have money," he said, taking my hand. "And we're paying for most of this ourselves. I don't understand why they're so against us having the wedding we want." "It's never been about the money," I explained. "It's about Stephanie setting the standard for what's appropriate. Anything more than what she did is seen as showing off or trying to outshine her." "That's ridiculous," Jason said firmly. "Your sister got the wedding she wanted. Why shouldn't you have the same right?" My best friend and maid of honor, Rachel Chen, had a similar reaction when I called her later that night. Rachel had witnessed my family dynamics firsthand since our college days and had always been my staunchest defender. "They're doing it again," she said when I finished explaining. "They're using Stephanie as the measuring stick for your life choices. Don't let them diminish your vision, Hazel. This is your wedding, not theirs, and certainly not Stephanie's second wedding." With Jason and Rachel's support, I decided to proceed with our plans despite my parents' disapproval. I had no idea that their resistance was about to transform from passive-aggressive comments into an ultimatum that would change our family forever. 3 months before our wedding date, my parents invited Jason and me to Sunday dinner. This wasn't unusual, we typically joined them once a month for these formal family meals, sitting around the antique mahogany dining table that had been in my mother's family for generations, using the good china and discussing appropriate topics like local politics or community events. What was unusual was that Stephanie and Richard were also present, despite living in Providence now for Richard's fellowship. The moment I saw my sister's BMW in the driveway, I felt a knot form in my stomach. Something's up, I whispered to Jason as we walked to the front door. Stephanie only drives up for special occasions. Maybe they just wanted the whole family together, Jason suggested, always willing to see the best in situations. I wished I could share his optimism. The tension was palpable from the moment we entered. My mother hugged me stiffly. My father offered Jason his typical firm handshake, and Stephanie sat primly on the sofa with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Richard, at least, seemed genuinely pleased to see us, asking Jason about a recent architectural project with actual interest. Dinner started with painfully stilted small talk about the weather and neighborhood developments. My father poured wine generously, which I recognized as his preparation for difficult conversations. By the time my mother brought out her apple cobbler for dessert, the anticipation had me so on edge I could barely eat. Finally, my father cleared his throat and placed his napkin beside his plate, the signal that formal discussion was about to begin. "Hazel, Jason, your mother and I wanted to talk to you about the wedding," he began, his tone reminiscent of the one he used when discussing serious financial matters with clients. "We've given this considerable thought, and we have some concerns we feel need to be addressed." My mother jumped in, her voice gentle but firm. "Sweetheart, we're worried that the event you're planning doesn't reflect the values we raised you with. The Harrison estate, the extensive floral installations you've described, the gourmet 7-course dinner, the 10-piece band, it all seems designed to impress rather than to celebrate love and commitment. We've seen the Instagram posts from your venue visits," my father continued. "The champagne wall, the imported Italian lighting, the custom dance floor? This isn't about marriage, it's about spectacle." I felt heat rising to my face as I realized they'd been monitoring my professional social media accounts, where it'd been documenting aspects of our planning process partly as content for my business. "Those posts are partly for my brand," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "And yes, some elements are elaborate because both Jason and I appreciate aesthetics and experiences. That doesn't make our intentions any less authentic." "Hazel," Stephanie interjected, her voice carrying that familiar note of condescension, "no one's questioning your right to get married how you want, but you have to admit this is all a bit much. When Richard and I got married, not everything is about you and Richard," I snapped, immediately regretting my tone but too hurt to apologize. "That's exactly the problem," my father said, pointing his finger at me. "Your attitude, this competitiveness, this need to make everything bigger and flashier than it needs to be." My mother reached across the table for my hand, which I reluctantly gave her. "We've decided we need to take a stand here, honey. We can't support this kind of display." "What exactly are you saying?" Jason asked, his normally calm voice tense. My father straightened in his chair, assuming the posture he used when delivering his non-negotiable terms. "We're saying that unless you scale back this wedding to something more reasonable, a smaller venue, fewer guests, less pageantry, we won't be attending." The words hit me like physical blows. "You'd miss my wedding? Over centerpieces and a guest count." "It's not about the specifics," my mother insisted. "It's about the overall approach. Look at Stephanie's wedding: meaningful, intimate, focused on what matters. Tasteful," Stephanie added. "People still tell me how refreshing it was to attend a wedding that wasn't trying too hard." Something snapped inside me. Trying too hard? Is that what you think I'm doing? Creating a beautiful experience that represents Jason and me is trying too hard. "Be honest, Hazel," Stephanie said, leaning forward. "You've always needed to be the center of attention. Remember your 6th birthday when you cried because the clown performed magic tricks for the other kids? Or your high school graduation party when you were upset that Dad invited his colleagues who wanted to talk to me about medical school? That's not fair," I protested, tears welling in my eyes. "I was 6, and at my graduation, I just wanted one day that was about my accomplishment, not yours. See. Stephanie turned to our parents. This is exactly what I've been saying. She's always been like this, competitive, attention-seeking, never satisfied with being ordinary. The revelation that they had been discussing me behind my back, with Stephanie apparently leading the character assassination, was too much. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Jason, we're leaving. I managed to say through the tightness in my throat. Hazel, don't be dramatic, my father said. Sit down and let's discuss this reasonably. There's nothing reasonable about threatening to boycott your daughter's wedding because it doesn't match your other daughter's aesthetic preferences, Jason said, standing beside me. His calm voice carried an edge I'd rarely heard. As we gathered our coats, my mother followed us to the door. Hazel, please understand we love you, but we can't condone this excess. Just think about what we've said. Make some changes, and, of course, we'll be there. What you're asking isn't for me to make changes, I said, finally meeting her eyes. You're asking me to be someone I'm not, to have Stephanie's wedding instead of my own. We left with my mother calling after us and my father's voice rumbling disapprovingly in the background. In the car, the tears I'd been holding back finally broke free. Jason held me while I sobbed, my world collapsing around the realization that my own parents might actually follow through on their threat. They'll come around, Jason kept saying. They wouldn't actually miss our wedding, they're just trying to pressure you. But the sick feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. This ultimatum wasn't an empty threat. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being measured against my sister and found wanting. The week following the disastrous dinner was one of the worst of my life. I fluctuated between desperate hope that my parents would reconsider and crushing certainty that they meant every word. I called my mother 3 times, each conversation ending in tears when she reiterated that their position remained unchanged. My father wouldn't even come to the phone. Honey, we're not trying to hurt you, my mother insisted during our last call. We're trying to guide you toward choices you won't regret later. The only thing I'll regret is having parents who valued appearances over being present for one of the most important days of my life. I responded before hanging up. I threw myself into wedding planning with renewed determination, partly out of spite, and partly because making decisions about linens and lighting gave me a sense of control when everything else felt like it was spinning apart. Jason worried about me, especially when I stopped sleeping and started working 14-hour days at my business to avoid thinking about the situation. Rachel came over one evening with ice cream and wine, determined to get me to talk rather than just work myself into exhaustion. She sat me down at our kitchen island and poured us each a generous glass of Cabernet. Have you heard anything more from your sister? She asked cautiously. Radio silence, I replied, taking a large sip, which is probably for the best. Rachel hesitated, then pulled out her phone. I need to show you something, but I don't want you to shoot the messenger. She pulled up Instagram and navigated to Stephanie's private account, which apparently Rachel followed. There, in a series of stories saved to her highlights, was evidence of what my sister had been doing behind my back. The first screenshot showed a text conversation between Stephanie and my mother. Stephanie. Mom, I saw Hazel's latest post about the wedding. Crystal chandeliers in a garden? She's completely lost touch with reality. This is getting ridiculous. Mom. I know, dear. Your father and I are at our wits' end. She's always been determined to do things her own way, but this is beyond excessive. Stephanie. It's embarrassing, honestly. All my colleagues follow her because she did Dr. Peterson's daughter's wedding, and they keep asking if she's always been this over the top. What should I tell them? Mom, just say that we're as concerned as they are. At least people will know this doesn't reflect our family values. There were other exchanges, spanning back months, all centered around critiquing my wedding plans and, increasingly, my character. In one particularly painful message, Stephanie had written, "Maybe this ultimatum is exactly what she needs." Hazel's always responded to firm boundaries. Remember when she wanted that ridiculous Sweet 16 party and you said no way? I felt physically ill reading through the evidence of my sister's campaign against me. She's been sabotaging me the entire time, I whispered. I'm so sorry, Rachel said, squeezing my hand. I debated whether to show you, but I thought you deserved to know the truth. Later that evening, after Rachel left and Jason returned from a late meeting with clients, I made a decision. I need to confront Stephanie directly, I told him. No more of this triangulated communication through our parents. The next day, I drove to Providence unannounced, knowing Stephanie would be home between shifts. When she opened her front door, her surprise quickly morphed into a guarded expression. "Hazel, what are you doing here? We need to talk," I said, walking past her into the immaculate living room that looked like it had been staged for a home decor magazine. "About why you've been poisoning Mom and Dad against my wedding." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but a flush crept up her neck. "Stephanie's tell when she was lying. Ever since we were children. I've seen the texts, Stephanie, the ones where you call my wedding ridiculous and embarrassing, where you encouraged Mom and Dad to issue their ultimatum." Her expression hardened. "If I did say those things, it was out of concern for the family." Concern? How is undermining my happiness showing concern? "Because this isn't about happiness, Hazel. It's about you always needing to be special, to stand out, to have all eyes on you." Her voice rose with each accusation. "Someone needs to protect our family's reputation from your constant need for attention." The raw resentment in her voice stunned me. "Is that what this is really about? You're worried my wedding will somehow damage the precious Bennett family image. Look at what you're planning. It's like something from a reality TV show. People will talk." "Let them talk. Why do you care what my wedding looks like? How does it affect you in any way?" She crossed her arms tightly. "Because for once in my life, I did something first, and I did it right. My wedding was perfect, everyone said so. It represented everything our parents taught us about restraint and propriety. And less than 2 years later, you have to come along and create this spectacle that makes mine look boring by comparison." The truth finally emerged. Stephanie was jealous. Not of my wedding specifically, but of the attention it might draw. The possibility that in this one area, I might outshine her. "I can't believe this," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "You're a successful surgeon, married to another successful surgeon. You have the career, the house, the lifestyle our parents always wanted for us, but you can't stand the thought that for one day, I might have something more beautiful than you had." "You don't understand," she said, her voice suddenly quieter. "Everything has always come so easily to you. Your business took off overnight. You have this charismatic personality everyone loves. Jason adores you and actually has interests outside of work, unlike Richard, who's barely home. Your life looks so perfect on Instagram with your glamorous events and creative vision. Easily." I was incredulous. "Are you kidding me? Nothing has ever been easy. I've worked myself to exhaustion, building my business, while constantly hearing how it doesn't compare to your noble career saving children. I've spent my entire life being compared to you and found lacking." Our argument continued, voices rising until Richard unexpectedly came downstairs. Had apparently come home early and overheard everything. "Stephanie," he said, his voice tight with disapproval, "is this true? Have you been trying to sabotage your sister's wedding?" Stephanie looked trapped. "You don't understand, Richard. She's making everything into a competition." Richard looked between us, then surprisingly turned to me. "Hazel, for what it's worth, I think what your parents are doing is completely unfair. And I had no idea Stephanie was involved to this extent. Stay out of this." Stephanie snapped at him. "No, I won't," he replied firmly. "This has gone far enough. Your sister's wedding plans are lovely, and they reflect her professional expertise and personal taste. There's nothing wrong with that. I hadn't expected an ally in my brother-in-law, and from Stephanie's expression, neither had she. The tension between them suggested this wasn't their first disagreement. Perhaps there were cracks in their supposedly perfect marriage that the family hadn't seen. As I left, Richard walked me to my car. "I'll try to talk some sense into her," he promised. "For what it's worth, I think your wedding sounds beautiful, and your parents are making a terrible mistake." I thanked him, but drove away with little hope that anything would change. The confrontation had only confirmed what I already knew: this wasn't really about my wedding being too flashy. It was about family dynamics that had been broken for years, possibly beyond repair. The final 4 weeks before our wedding were a blur of vendor confirmations, last-minute decisions, and emotional turbulence. On the surface, everything was coming together beautifully. The custom invitations had been sent, and RSVPs were flowing in, the menu had been finalized with our caterer, and the florist had secured the exact peony variety it hoped for, despite the seasonal challenges. Behind the scenes, however, I was barely holding it together. I developed anxiety attacks that would hit without warning, leaving me gasping for breath in fitting rooms or during client meetings. Sleep became elusive, and when I did manage to drift off, I had recurring nightmares about walking down the aisle alone while everyone stared and whispered. Jason's mother, Barbara, became my unexpected rock during this time. After learning about my parents' ultimatum, she stepped in with practical and emotional support that brought me to tears with its generosity. Weddings have a way of bringing out both the best and worst in families, she told me over coffee in her warm, cluttered kitchen. Unlike my mother's pristine countertops, Barbara's were strewn with cookbooks and pottery shed made in her retirement classes. But I want you to know that no matter what, you are gaining a family in us. We may not be perfect, but we will be there. Barbara accompanied me to my final dress fitting when my mother should have been there. She helped address invitations and assembled welcome bags for out-of-town guests. Most importantly, she listened without judgment when I needed to vent my hurt and confusion. Jason's father, Robert, was equally supportive in his more reserved way, offering to walk me down the aisle if my father upheld his boycott. No pressure either way, he assured me. Just know the offer stands. Rachel organized an emergency planning committee of bridesmaids who divided up tasks to ease my burden. They created spreadsheets, confirmed details with vendors, and ran interference when well-meaning guests asked awkward questions about my parents' involvement. During my darkest moments, this circle of friends reminded me that family isn't always about blood. With 3 weeks to go, I made one final attempt at reconciliation. Without telling Jason or anyone else, I drove to my parents' house on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew my father would be working from home and my mother would be returning from her Pilates class. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes, rehearsing what I would say, before finally gathering the courage to approach the house. Using my key, I let myself in quietly, intending to wait in the living room. Instead, I froze when I heard voices coming from my father's home office, my parents, and, unmistakably, Stephanie. I still think you're doing the right thing, my sister was saying. Hazel needs to understand there are consequences for her choices. I hate missing her wedding, my mother replied, her voice wavering. But Robert's right. If we give in now, she'll never learn. She's always been like this, my father said wearily. Always needing to be the center of attention, always pushing boundaries. Remember that school play when she was 9? She was just a tree but somehow managed to steal focus from the lead actors. I felt my chest constrict at the unfairness of his characterization. I'd been excited about being in my first play, and had taken my small role seriously. How had that been transformed in their memories to attention-seeking behavior? I think we should consider attending just the ceremony, Stephanie suggested. That way you can say you witnessed the actual marriage, but leave before the reception to make your point about the extravagance. That might be a reasonable compromise, my mother mused. Unable to listen to any more, I pushed open the office door. 3 startled faces turned toward me. Hazel! My mother exclaimed. How did you… I still have a key, I said flatly. I came to talk to you one last time, but I guess I've heard everything I need to hear. You shouldn't eavesdrop on private conversations, my father admonished, recovering quickly. And you shouldn't talk about your daughter like she's a problem to be managed, I countered. A school play from 20 years ago? Really, Dad? Is that the evidence you're using to justify missing my wedding? We were just discussing possibilities, my mother said placatingly. Nothing's been decided. It sounds pretty decided to me, I replied. And Stephanie's compromise is particularly rich. Attend the ceremony but skip the reception to make your point. As if my wedding day is an appropriate time for parenting lessons. Hazel, you need to calm down, Stephanie said in the same tone she probably used with difficult patience. No, I don't, I said, feeling strangely calm despite my racing heart. I need parents who love me for who I am, not who they wish I was. I need a sister who can celebrate my happiness instead of seeing it as a threat to her own. but clearly, am not going to get either. My mother began to cry, which would normally have softened me, but I was beyond that now. We do love you, Hazel. That's why this is so hard. If this is love, I said, then maybe I'm better off without it. I walked out of the house to the sound of my mother calling after me, and my father's angry voice telling her to let me go. As I drove away, I felt a strange mixture of devastation and liberation. The hope I'd been clinging to that they would eventually change their minds had been extinguished, but with it went the paralyzing uncertainty. Now, I knew exactly where I stood, and there was a certain freedom in that knowledge. When I returned home, I told Jason everything. He held me while I cried, then helped me make a list of practical adjustments needed now that we were certain my parents wouldn't attend. We revised the seating chart, notified our day of coordinator, and reworked the ceremony program. Practical tasks that gave shape to our new reality. That night, as we lay in bed, Jason asked the question I'd been avoiding. Are you sure you want to go through with the wedding as planned? We could still scale back if it would help with your parents. I thought about it honestly before answering. I'm sure. This was never really about the wedding details. It's about them wanting me to be more like Stephanie, and me finally accepting that I never will be. Changing our plans now wouldn't fix the real problem. Jason kissed my forehead in the darkness. Then we'll have the wedding we want, and it will be beautiful with or without them. The week of our wedding arrived with a flurry of activity that left little time for dwelling on family drama. Vendors confirmed final details, welcome bags needed assembly, and out-of-town guests began arriving, requiring airport pickups and dinner reservations. What I hadn't anticipated was the arrival of extended family members, my mother's sister Catherine and her husband from Seattle, my father's brother James and his family from Chicago, and various cousins I hadn't seen in years. I had sent them invitations out of courtesy, never expecting them to make the trip given the distance and expense. Of course we came, Aunt Catherine said when she hugged me at the hotel where most guests were staying. We wouldn't miss your wedding for the world. Later, over coffee in the hotel restaurant, Catherine revealed something disturbing. Stephanie called several of us, suggested we might want to reconsider attending given the family situation. She did what? I nearly spilled my latte in shock. Oh yes. Called it a courtesy heads up about unfortunate tension within the immediate family. Said she wanted to spare us any awkwardness. Catherine's normally kind face hardened. I told her I'd been attending family events through divorces, feuds, and scandals since before she was born, and I didn't need protection from awkwardness. I was speechless at this new level of interference. I can't believe she would try to keep you away too. Catherine reached across the table and took my hand. Hazel, what's really going on? Your mother has given me some convoluted explanation about wedding extravagance, but that can't be the whole story. Something about my aunt's direct question and genuine concern broke through my carefully maintained composure. The whole story poured out of me, the lifelong comparisons to Stephanie, the criticism of my career choice despite its success, the ultimatum about the wedding, and finally the conversation I'd overheard. I always knew Diana favored Stephanie. Catherine said when I finished, referring to my mother by her first name. Even when you were little, I mentioned it once, and she got so defensive I never brought it up again, but I never thought it would go this far. Was I really such an attention-seeking child? I asked, voicing the doubt that had been planted by my father's comment about the school play. Good heavens, no. You were spirited and creative, yes. You had ideas and opinions from the moment you could talk, but those are wonderful qualities that make you who you are. Catherine shook her head. The problem was never you, Hazel. It was that your parents didn't know how to nurture a child who didn't fit their predetermined mold. She went on to share stories I'd never heard about my mother's own childhood, how their parents had favored Catherine while criticizing my mother for being too serious and inflexible. She's recreated the same dynamic, just flipped the roles. Catherine observed. She identifies with Stephanie's perfectionism and ambition because those were the qualities she developed trying to win our parents' approval. This perspective was revelatory, offering a new lens through which to view the family patterns that had shaped my life. It didn't excuse my parents' behavior, but it helped me understand it in a way I never had before. The conversation took another surprising turn when Catherine revealed that Stephanie's supposedly modest wedding had actually cost significantly more than mine was projected to. The country club venue may have looked understated, but your parents paid for top-shelf everything behind the scenes, she explained. Premium open bar, imported truffles on the menu, custom monogrammed everything. The difference was that it all looked conventionally elegant rather than visually abundant like your plans. So it wasn't even about the money or extravagance. I realized it was about the appearance of modesty versus the reality. Exactly, Catherine confirmed. Your sister's wedding was designed to showcase restraint while actually sparing no expense. It was about the image, not the values. This revelation somehow made the whole situation both clearer and more absurd. The objection wasn't to extravagance itself, but to the visible celebration of beauty and abundance that characterized my aesthetic. As wedding week progressed, Jason continued to be my steadfast support. When I broke down sobbing the night before the rehearsal dinner, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of everything, he just held me and let me cry. I keep thinking about walking down that aisle alone, I confessed. Everyone watching and pitying me because my own parents refused to come. No one will be pitying you, he assured me. They'll be thinking how strong and authentic you are, celebrating your love your way despite everything. The rehearsal dinner, hosted by Jason's parents at a waterfront restaurant, was a bittersweet affair. The empty seats reserved for my parents were a visual reminder of their absence, but the room was otherwise filled with genuine love and support. Rachel gave a toast that brought me to tears, celebrating not just my relationship with Jason but my resilience throughout the wedding planning process. To Hazel and Jason, she concluded, raising her glass, who remind us that true love means being seen and accepted for exactly who you are. That night, back in our hotel suite, I sent one final text to my parents. Tomorrow I'm marrying the love of my life. The man who has never tried to change me or make me smaller to fit his idea of who I should be. There will be 2 seats reserved for you until the very last minute, in case you change your minds. I love you, despite everything, and I wish you were going to be there. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one. As I tried to fall asleep, I thought about what Aunt Catherine had said about family patterns repeating through generations. I made a silent promise to myself that if Jason and I had children someday, I would break that cycle once and for all. I woke on my wedding day to sunlight streaming through the hotel curtains and the distant sound of Rachel organizing the bridesmaids in the suite's living area. For a moment, I lay still, allowing myself to feel everything: the excitement of marrying Jason, the lingering sadness about my parents, and the determination to make this day a celebration despite it all. My phone screen showed several congratulatory messages, but nothing from my parents or Stephanie. I had known deep down this would be the case, but the confirmation still stung. I put the phone away, deciding that from this moment forward, I would focus only on what I had, not what I was missing. The getting ready process was a whirlwind of hairstyling, makeup application, champagne toasts, and laughter. My bridesmaids, Rachel, Jason's sister Emily, and 3 friends from college created exactly the atmosphere I needed, one of joy and uncomplicated support. Barbara arrived mid-morning, bringing a vintage handkerchief embroidered with blue flowers. "Something borrowed and something blue," she said, pressing it into my hand. "It was my grandmother's, and I carried it at my wedding. I'd be honored if you'd carry it at yours." The gesture nearly undid me. "Thank you," I managed, blinking back tears. "For everything, Barbara. For stepping in when my mother wouldn't." "Oh, honey," she said, hugging me carefully to avoid disturbing my makeup. "The privilege has been all mine. Now, let me help you with that dress before these young ladies have too much more champagne." The dress, a vintage-inspired gown with delicate beading and a dramatic open back, had been another point of contention with my mother, who had called it too revealing when I showed her the design. But as Barbara fastened the last button and I turned to face the mirror, I knew I had made the right choice. I looked like myself, just the most elegant version. "You're a vision," Barbara said, her eyes misting. "Absolutely perfect." As the ceremony time approached, nervous energy began to build. I checked my phone one last time before handing it to Rachel, still nothing from my parents. I took a deep breath and nodded to my bridal party. "I'm ready." The historic mansion looked exactly as I had envisioned. Roses and peonies in soft blush and cream tones adorned the garden ceremony space, crystal chandeliers had been suspended from sturdy tree branches, and golden hour sunlight cast everything in a warm glow. As I waited in a side room for the processional to begin, I tried not to think about who would walk me down the aisle. Jason's father Robert had reiterated his offer the day before, and I had accepted gratefully. But as the bridal party began their procession and I prepared to make my entrance, a commotion at the back of the garden caught my attention. Through the window, I glimpsed a familiar figure hurrying to find a seat. Richard, Stephanie's husband, looking slightly disheveled as if he had rushed to arrive on time. I was touched that he had come, especially since it likely meant tension with Stephanie, but there was no time to dwell on it. The wedding coordinator gave me my cue, and Robert appeared at my side, offering his arm with a warm smile. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," I confirmed, pushing all family drama from my mind. Walking down the aisle was a surreal experience. The faces of loved ones turned toward me with expressions of joy and admiration. Jason waited at the end of the path, looking so handsome in his tailored suit that my heart skipped. The 2 empty seats in the front row caught my eye briefly, but then my gaze returned to Jason, and everything else faded away. The ceremony was everything we had hoped for, personal, emotional, and authentic to our relationship. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves, promising not just love and fidelity but also understanding and the freedom to grow together. When the officiant pronounced us, husband and wife, the garden erupted in cheers and applause that felt like a collective affirmation of our choice to be true to ourselves. During the cocktail hour, while we took photos, Richard approached to offer congratulations. "I hope it's okay that I came," he said, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I didn't RSVP properly, but I made a last-minute decision that I needed to be here." "Of course it's okay," I assured him. "I'm touched that you came. Is everything all right with you and Stephanie?" Richard's expression clouded. "Not really. We've been having problems for a while, but this situation with your wedding brought things to a head. I couldn't support the way she was behaving, and she couldn't understand why I wouldn't take her side." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it despite everything. "Don't be," he replied. "It's forcing us to address issues we've been avoiding. But today isn't about that, it's about celebrating you and Jason. And I have to say, everything is spectacular. You've created something really special here." As Richard moved away to get a drink, Jason squeezed my hand. "You okay?" "Actually, yes," I realized, somewhat surprised. "I am." The reception unfolded like a dream. The historic ballroom glowed with candles and fairy lights. The band kept the dance floor packed, and the dinner service received compliments from even the most culinarily sophisticated guests. If anyone was gossiping about my parents' absence, I didn't notice or care. For our first dance, Jason and I swayed to "At Last" by Etta James, a choice my mother had criticized as cliché but which felt perfectly right to us. As we moved across the dance floor, Jason whispered, "Look around, Hazel. Look at what you created. It's magnificent." He was right. The beauty surrounding us was a physical manifestation of my creative vision and our love story. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. I had stayed true to myself, and the result was more magical than I could have imagined. The father-daughter dance became a special moment with Jason's dad, who twirled me around the floor with surprising grace while guests applauded supportively. During the mother-son dance that followed, Barbara caught my eye and blew me a kiss, her way of saying she was there for me too. Toward the end of the evening, Rachel clinked her glass for the maid of honor speech. Her words captured our friendship and my journey so perfectly that tears flowed freely down my cheeks. "Hazel has always had the courage to be authentically herself," she concluded. "Even when it would have been easier to conform to others' expectations, that authenticity is what makes her such a remarkable friend, businesswoman, and now wife." Jason, "You're getting not just a partner but a woman who will never settle for less than the full expression of love and creativity in your life together." As the night wound down, Richard approached again, this time to say goodbye. "I have an early flight tomorrow," he explained. "But before I go, I wanted to give you this." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note that simply said, "The bravest act is to be yourself in a world that's trying to make you like everyone else." You showed that courage today. Wishing you and Jason a lifetime of happiness. Richard. It wasn't until much later, after the sparkler send-off and our return to the honeymoon suite, that Jason and I had a moment to reflect on the day. Any regrets? He asked gently as we sat on the balcony overlooking the estate gardens, still in our wedding finery. I considered the question honestly. About the wedding itself? Not one. It was exactly what we wanted it to be. I paused. About my family not being here? Yes, that hurts. But I'm starting to think maybe this was inevitable, the breaking point for patterns that have been harmful for years. You're probably right, Jason said. And from what Richard said, it sounds like there may be changes coming in your family dynamic one way or another. I leaned my head on his shoulder, exhausted but content. Whatever happens next, well, face it together. That's what today was really about, after all. As we fell asleep that night, I felt the strange dual reality of heartbreak and joy that had characterized this entire journey. But for the first time, the joy felt stronger, a foundation solid enough to build a future on. Our 2-week honeymoon in Greece was a blissful escape from family drama days spent exploring ancient ruins and crystal-clear waters, evenings savoring local cuisine and wine under starlit skies. The distance and newlywed happiness created a protective bubble around us, and I deliberately checked my phone only occasionally. No messages from my parents appeared, though Aunt Catherine sent updates confirming they were still maintaining their silence. What I hadn't expected were the dozens of congratulatory messages from family, friends, and distant relatives who had seen our wedding photos on social media, people who, I realized, must be aware of my parents' absence but chose to connect with me directly anyway. Reality crashed back upon our return to Boston. Our apartment was filled with delivered wedding gifts to unpack, thank you notes to write, and the inevitable question of how to move forward with my family, relationships, or lack thereof. A week after our return, Aunt Catherine called with news that made my stomach drop. Your parents have been telling people they weren't included in the wedding planning, she reported, her voice tight with disapproval. That you and Jason made all the decisions without them and they felt pushed aside. That's completely untrue, I protested. I tried to involve Mom from the beginning, but she just kept comparing everything to Stephanie's wedding. I know, dear. Most people who know your family well aren't buying it anyway. Especially now that your photos are circulating, they're absolutely stunning, by the way. Everyone's talking about how beautiful everything was. This was small comfort against the pain of knowing my parents were actively rewriting history to avoid accountability. But what Catherine told me next was even more unsettling. Stephanie seems to be having a hard time with the attention your wedding is getting. She's been making strange comments on social media about how true elegance doesn't need to shout, and family should come before spectacle. I logged onto Instagram after our call and discovered that several of our wedding photos had indeed gone viral within our extended social circles. The historic venue, the suspended chandeliers, the abundant florals details I had chosen for their beauty and meaning to Jason and me had captured people's imagination. Comments praised the creativity and romantic atmosphere, with several engaged couples asking for my professional contact information. My business account had gained hundreds of new followers, with potential clients specifically referencing elements from my own wedding in their inquiries. Under normal circumstances, this would have been cause for celebration both personally and professionally. Instead, it became the catalyst for a renewed family crisis when my parents showed up unannounced at our apartment 3 weeks after the wedding. I was working from home when the doorbell rang. Opening it to find my mother and father standing stiffly in the hallway felt like a scene from a dream, both surreal and oddly inevitable. "May we come in?" my father asked formally. I stepped aside wordlessly, my heart pounding. They entered our living room, declining my automatic offer of coffee or water. The three of us sat in awkward silence for several moments before my mother spoke. "We thought it was time we talked," she began. "About the wedding and everything." 3 weeks later, I noted. After missing the event entirely, my father cleared his throat. "We stand by our decision, Hazel. The wedding was exactly what we feared. It would be excessive and showy. And yet, everyone who attended found it beautiful and meaningful," I countered. "Funny how that works. We've seen the photos," my mother admitted. "It looked nice. But that's not the point. Then, what is the point, exactly? Because I'm still trying to understand how parents could willfully miss their daughter's wedding over aesthetic preferences. My father leaned forward. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was about principles, about raising you with values of modesty and restraint that didn't seem to take hold. Something snapped inside me. 3 weeks of post-wedding goodwill from friends and strangers had helped me see my parents' actions with new clarity. This wasn't about my wedding at all, it was about control they felt they were losing, not just over the event, but over me and the narrative of our family. Let's be honest for once, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. This has never been about modesty or restraint. It's about the fact that I've never been the daughter you wanted. I've never been Stephanie. That's not my mother started. It is, I interrupted. My entire life, you've compared me to her. My grades, my career choice, my personality, nothing I did was ever good enough because it wasn't what Stephanie would do. I turned to my father. When I was 10, I won first place in the school art contest. You know what you said? That's nice, but art won't get you into medical school. When I was 16 and started my first small business selling handmade jewelry, you called it a cute hobby and asked when I was going to focus on something serious. When my event planning business turned its first profit, you suggested I was just lucky to know the right people. My mother's eyes welled with tears, but I wasn't finished. And you, I continued, facing her. When I got accepted to Boston University's business program, you spent the entire celebration dinner talking about Stephanie's medical school applications. When I bought my first apartment, you criticized the neighborhood as trying to be trendy. When Jason proposed, your first question wasn't if I was happy, but what kind of ring it was and whether his firm was established enough. Jason had come home during my speech and now stood quietly in the doorway, bearing witness but letting me handle this confrontation my way. Hazel, my father began, his voice taking on the patronizing tone it heard all my life. You're being dramatic again. We've always supported you. Supporting someone means accepting who they are, Jason interjected, moving to stand beside me. Not who you wish they were. My mother dabbed at her eyes. We only wanted what was best for you. No, I said firmly. You wanted what aligned with your vision of the perfect family. Stephanie fit that vision, and I didn't. So you tried to make me feel that my natural inclinations toward creativity, toward abundance, toward celebration were somehow wrong or shameful. My parents exchanged a look that told me they weren't ready to hear this truth. My father stood up. I can see this conversation isn't going to be productive, he said stiffly. Perhaps we should try again when you're feeling more reasonable. Don't you understand? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. This is exactly the problem. When I express feelings you don't like, in being dramatic or unreasonable, you've never been able to see me clearly because you've always been looking for Stephanie. My mother rose too, tears now flowing freely. We love you, Hazel. We've always loved you. We just love shouldn't have conditions, I said quietly. It shouldn't require me to be smaller or different or less myself. They left shortly afterward, my mother in tears and my father in cold silence. No resolution, no real acknowledgement of the harm they'd caused, just a vague suggestion that we might talk again when things had settled. I hadn't even finished processing this encounter when my phone rang, Stephanie calling for the first time since before the wedding. How dare you turn our parents against me? She began without preamble, her voice shrill with anger. Mom called me sobbing about all these accusations you made. I didn't say anything that wasn't true, I replied, too emotionally drained for pretense. They've always bent over backward for you. Always made excuses for your difficult personality and attention-seeking behavior. And this is how you repay them. The irony was so profound I nearly laughed. Stephanie, that is literally the opposite of reality. But I don't expect you to see that when your entire identity is built around being the perfect daughter. At least I know how to behave like a decent family member. I don't create unnecessary drama or embarrass everyone with tacky displays of, I ended the call mid-sentence and blocked her number, something I should have done weeks ago. The relief was immediate and profound, like setting down a heavy burden I'd been carrying my entire life. Jason wrapped his arms around me as I stared at the blocked contact screen. Are you okay? He asked gently. Not yet, I admitted. But I think I will be. 6 months passed, bringing seasonal changes and personal growth in equal measure. Fall gave way to winter, our first holiday season as a married couple approached, and I found myself slowly rebuilding my life with clearer boundaries and new understanding. The process wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong and certain in my decisions. Other days I was overwhelmed by grief for the family relationships I'd always wanted but never truly had. Jason suggested therapy about a month after the confrontation with my parents, and it proved to be one of the most valuable investments ED ever made. Dr. Larson, my therapist, helped me recognize the patterns of emotional manipulation I'd normalized throughout my life. What you're describing is a form of family role assignment, she explained during an early session. You were cast as the problem child while your sister was the golden child. Neither role is healthy for the person living it. This framework helped me understand not only my own experiences but also Stephanie's behavior. Her identity had been so thoroughly wrapped up in being the perfect daughter that any threat to that narrative, like my wedding gaining attention and admiration, felt like an existential threat. 3 months into therapy, I received an unexpected letter from my mother. Not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter on the stationery she reserved for important correspondence. Dear Hazel, it began. I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation. While I still believe your father and I did our best as parents, I'm beginning to see that our best may have been filtered through expectations and patterns we weren't fully aware of. She went on to acknowledge some of what Id said during our confrontation, admitting that perhaps she had favored Stephanie's achievements and personality because they were more familiar to her. Your Aunt Catherine reminded me recently of how our own parents treated me compared to her. The parallels are uncomfortable to consider. The letter wasn't a full apology or acceptance of responsibility, but it was the first crack in the wall of denial my parents had built. She ended by suggesting we meet for coffee someday when you're ready. I showed the letter to Dr. Larson, who cautioned me against expecting too much too quickly. This is a positive sign, but real change takes time. It's okay to proceed cautiously. I took her advice, waiting 2 weeks before responding with a brief note suggesting coffee the following month. Our first meeting was strained and brief, but it opened the door to others, carefully bounded encounters, where we began the slow work of building a new relationship based on who we actually were, not who either of us wished the other to be. My father remained distant, unable or unwilling to acknowledge any wrongdoing. When my mother tentatively raised the idea of a family dinner including him, I set clear conditions: no criticism of my choices, no comparisons to Stephanie, and a genuine effort to get to know Jason and me as we are. Whether he would ever meet these conditions remained uncertain, but establishing the boundaries felt empowering regardless of the outcome. Stephanie, meanwhile, doubled down on her resentment. Through family grapevines, I learned she had declared me dead to her after I blocked her number. A melodramatic gesture that would have hurt deeply 6 months earlier, but now struck me as sadly predictable. The most surprising development came in February, when Richard called to inform me he had filed for divorce. It's been a long time coming, he admitted, but the way Stephanie behaved around your wedding forced me to see patterns I'd been ignoring. The control issues, the competitiveness, the inability to be happy for others, it doesn't make for a healthy marriage. I felt a complicated mixture of sadness and vindication. While I took no pleasure in my sister's pain, Richard's decision validated my own perceptions of her behavior. Throughout these family upheavals, my relationship with Jason deepened through our shared challenges. We developed rituals for supporting each other through difficult days and celebrating small victories. My business continued to thrive, boosted by the attention our wedding had received. I was even approached about planning a wedding for a minor celebrity, a career milestone that both excited and terrified me. Aunt Catherine became a consistent presence in our lives, filling some of the maternal role my own mother had left vacant. She shared family stories I'd never heard, helping me place my experiences in the broader context of intergenerational patterns. Your grandmother was exactly the same way with your mother, she told me over dinner one evening. Nothing Diana did was ever good enough. I think that's why she became so rigid and perfectionist herself, trying to finally win approval that never came. As Thanksgiving approached, Jason and I faced the question of holiday plans. Rather than subjecting ourselves to the tension of a traditional family gathering, we decided to host our own chosen family celebration. Friends, Jason's parents and siblings, Aunt Catherine and her husband, and even Richard, who had no local family of his own. The evening was everything. Holidays should be warm, relaxed, filled with laughter and genuine connection. Looking around our dining table at the faces of people who accepted and valued us exactly as we were, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. Later, as Jason and I looked through our wedding album, I found myself lingering over a photo captured just after our ceremony. In it, we're walking back down the aisle together, faces alight with joy, surrounded by guests whose expressions mirror our happiness. The empty front row seats aren't visible, and in their absence, the photo tells a different story, one of celebration and authentic love, rather than loss. You know, I said to Jason, closing the album, I think I've been looking at this all wrong. How so? He asked. I've been focusing on who wasn't at our wedding instead of who was. The people who were there, they were the ones who truly wanted to celebrate us as we are. Maybe that's actually the perfect guest list. Jason smiled and kissed my forehead. I think you might be right. The journey of healing wasn't over family wounds run deep, and rewriting decades of learned patterns takes more than a few months of therapy. But I had begun to understand that true family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's built choice by choice, boundary by boundary, with people who make space for your authentic self to flourish. As I write this now, that knowledge feels like the most valuable wedding gift I could have received, more precious than any crystal or silver, more enduring than even the most beautiful photographs of our day. The understanding that refusing to dim my light isn't selfish or wrong. That authenticity is worth fighting for, even when the cost feels impossibly high. So if you're struggling with family who can't accept you as you are, know this: you are not alone. You deserve to be celebrated in all your authentic glory, whether that means a flashy wedding or simply the courage to live your truth daily. The family you were born into may never give you that gift, but the family you choose and create can more than make up for it. What's your experience with family expectations? Have you ever had to choose between being true to yourself or pleasing others? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. And remember, authentic living isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to shine brightly in your own life, without apology.